This whole system is also super efficient because it uses not just less ground, not just less space, not just infinitely stackable on top of each other, but also 99% less water is used in vertical farming.
The Uncle Gold Podcast.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Uncle Gold Podcast. My name is Borna. If you've just joined the Uncle Gold Podcast, you know that we discover topics on how to find the gold in life, and we bring on guests to talk about really cool topics. And today we went completely green. Ladies and gentlemen, Brendan Caulfield is with me back again here on the Uncle Gold Podcast. Brendan, welcome back.
Thanks, Borna. Great to be back. What is this, 4 or 5 times now?
I think it's number 5. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So it's always brilliant to talk to you, and we talk about really fascinating topics. So what have you got on the plate for us today?
I like your wordplay there. So for everybody who missed our podcast, yes, this is, I think, number 5. We talked about technologies that are kind of impacting the world to change it to a better place. And we talked about electric vehicles. We talked about going to space, like to Mars and future of humanity. We also talked about electric cities, electric cars, a lot of topics that are kind of hot today. And in the last topic, we went deep into electricity, car makers, and kind of the future of where this whole market is going. But today we're kind of going more towards nature, but we're going to do a nice little segue to technology there as well, because me and Brendan are huge fans. So if you haven't, definitely watch those episodes before. And today we're going to cover 2 topics again. The first part of the podcast is going to be Brendan. He's going to talk about alternatives to food that are coming. He's going to talk about Beyond Meat Burger, 3D printed meat, and a lot of different materials from which meat is made. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk about vertical farming. So we're preparing a special meal for you guys. Strap up, get some snacks, because you're probably going to get hungry while listening to this podcast. Brendan, without any further ado, start us in with the topic. So most people usually just buy chicken and beef and pork and stuff like that in supermarkets, and they don't even think about the impact that it's having on nature and everything. But there are some solutions coming. Can you tell us a little bit more about that topic?
Sure, absolutely. Well, like it should be evident for people from agricultural countries like Ireland, but may not be evident to everybody who listens to the podcast, that meat production takes up a lot of land use. And in order to clear land for meat production, you need to remove forestry. And that's obviously a bad thing for the environment. And then you've got the carbon emissions from the actual practice of farming. Not to mention the cruelty and ethical problems that come along with slaughtering animals for food. So for many decades now, of course, there's been the vegetarian and vegan movements that have looked for an alternative to eating meat, whether that is just going for a purely vegetarian diet or other more exotic ways to get the nutrients and proteins that the human body needs to survive. And a lot of those have been very successful. And for decades, we've had companies like the Linda McCartney Company, Corn, Quorn, producing these meat substitute items. And those were typically done with a fungal method. So you can get certain species of fungus, grow them in large quantities in big, like 1,000-liter vats, give them the ideal conditions and feed them, and then go through another process that involves mixing in glucose and ammonia to give them the right sort of protein structure and texture, and then kill them. You do still have to kill stuff, unfortunately, to eat it, but kill them in such a way that it sort of produces a texture that's almost meat-like. And then you add flavorings and other additives, maybe for nutritional benefits and so on, and you come out with stuff like products that have been on store shelves and on our plates for decades, like the Linda McCartney sausages, corn nuggets, or minced meat, and it's more or less indistinguishable from the meat that you get from an animal. in some ways, like if you were clued in, you'd go, oh, yeah, I can taste that this is somehow different. But if you aren't given prior knowledge and you eat some of these products, you wouldn't know. And those have actually been around for quite some time, as I say. So there's almost a sense of them not being as revolutionary as what we're talking about in general on the podcast here. But the thing is that they've been very niche, and they're growing in, I suppose, customer base all the time now, and particularly with this plethora of other options that are coming up, it's turning into a much bigger market. So to get into some of the benefits of it, in order to create, say, a fungal chicken wing or chicken breast, you would be using 97% less feed to feed this vat of fungus than you would for an actual chicken. You'd feed it 93% less water, and it will produce 97% less CO2. In large part because any CO2 that it produces, then later in the cycle, it actually reabsorbs that and uses it in its own growth. The fermentation process is quite like cheese, and it is generally nutritionally complete. You'll have all 9 essential amino acids that you get from meat, but it can be lacking in fiber and zinc, but that can be made up for with some additives.
Okay.
So there are concerns, of course, with any kind of fungus, that there are a lot of people who would have fungal allergies. And so that is an issue with some of these foods. So there are people who can't eat those. So I suppose you want alternatives then to that. So another item that has been used as a foodstuff for quite some time, and it's sort of been on the fringe of Western foods. It's taken off more in sort of health foods, protein supplements. You find it in sushi and maybe in, excuse me, in some baking additives, is algae. Algae is pond scum. It's the stuff that floats on top of the water, or in fact, seaweed is an algae. You were saying that to me the other day, and I was like, no, it's a plant, but it is an algae. Algae are technically a kind of plant anyway, but they're not quite the same as regular plants. They're sort of independent. They float free, don't have root systems. So algae is actually amazingly high in lots of nutrients, particularly in protein, obviously, because it's used as a protein supplement. You can make spirulina, which is this fairly commonly used thickener for use in baking, and that, I don't think, I didn't know spirulina was algae based, but there you go. You can also, those omega-3 capsules that you might have taken as a kid. They're the ones I would have taken were fish based.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get algae-based omega-3, so it's cruelty-free. And then I've seen plenty of examples of this in the supermarket. You see algae crisps all around the place. I don't know, I never found them particularly appetizing. Just the idea of eating crispy algae was like, do I want to? But the current, or the modern, more sort of revolutionary use for it is in caking algae together and giving it textures that are almost meat-like. I don't think it's quite as successful as the fungal meat imitations, but if you're looking for something that will fill that slot in the meal plate without having any cruelty attached to it, algae may be the way to go. It's used in a lot of animal feeds as well. Used in meat preparation, oddly enough, and as an additive in cereals as well. It's nutritious, it grows fast, there's no deforestation involved, it's generally environmentally and ecologically sound. However, of course, when you think of algae, one of the things I think of anyway, because it sort of comes up when I'm looking into space news and stuff, that a lot of the times the astronauts in the ISS will look out and see these vast, colorful washes across the ocean. And this is an algal bloom, where these incredibly huge areas of ocean get deoxygenated because a species of algae has had basically an orgy and just spread out across this area of ocean. And it's actually incredibly destructive towards those ocean environments because it deoxygenates the water and fish suffocate. So you get these dead fish floating in this algae infested water. So that's a natural occurrence. It is something that is influenced, of course, by human activity, though, because of changes in ocean currents and changes in the salinity of seawater, oil spills, and that kind of thing.
Temperature as well.
Yes, absolutely. So it's fast growing, nutritious, and there's actually immune system boosting properties of algae as well. So it's pretty good for you, and it can be grown in otherwise very limited conditions. You basically just get a tank and you can grow these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's ideal, again, to bring up space flight for feeding spaceborne populations. So people on spacecraft, far from Earth, far from resupply. If you have the basic nutrients that the algae needs, then you can create a nutritious food source for humans.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I say, with various additives, make it somewhat like food that we'd be used to. In the science fiction series The Expanse, we have the belter population. These are the people who have for generations lived and mined the asteroids. This is several centuries in the future. And so are adapted to life in outer space and have developed their own culture, which is an amalgam of all the cultures of the people who originally went out there, and have subsisted for generations on these kinds of foods, and in particular a form of algae that they grow in vats, and they turn it into everything from pasta to this kind of kibble that they call it, this kind of tray of broken up, almost bread-like substance. And that could be a realistic view of how future humans may eat. The agriculture that these processes replace is accountable for about 42% of the impact of climate change, between the transportation emissions that are associated with it, but also just the land deforestation and the greenhouse gas emissions produced by the actual agriculture itself, cow burps, for example.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the Uncle Gold podcast. If you want to support this whole project, make sure you go to the second channel called Uncle Gold Podcast Clips. There I create short form videos with the best topics from the interviews that I do on the main channel. You get their videos daily. They're separated nicely into playlists, so you can choose the topic that you want to watch most. And now, let's go back to the video.
What is next on the list?
So next would be lab-grown or cultured meat. I think most of the marketing people involved in this prefer if we call it cultured meat, because lab-grown kind of conjures the images of mad scientists. And of course, this is, I think, at least in my view, the sexiest of the sort of new foods that are coming along the line. And this is actual meat, as opposed to the others, which are trying to imitate meat. This is meat that comes from a living animal, originally anyway, and doesn't require the animal to die. And that sounds kind of gruesome, actually, when I put it like that. But we're talking about a tiny biopsy, a small amount of cells, the kind of thing that you might have done if you have a medical issue that is feared to be cancer. You get a little biopsy done, you get a plaster over the wound, and you're good. That biopsy is taken. The cells in it are compelled to reproduce, and you end up growing an enormous amount of meat from this biopsy. Now, you can biopsy an area of the animal that you want to reproduce, and take the mature or primary cells from that area and reproduce those. Say you want, a stomach cells or not stomach cells, but like belly cells for a pork belly, or
chicken
shoulder
breast
cells. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then reproduce them. Now, when you grow the meat, you're not necessarily going to get an actual pork chop or chicken breast. You will get meat of that quality, provided you provide it the right nutrient mix as it grows. But what you can do is basically put that in a blender, and you've got, minced meat. You can create chicken nuggets, actual chicken nuggets from a chicken that didn't die.
Yeah.
You can create beef burgers, patties and pork sausages, all these things using meat, actual meat, without death associated with it, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. How does the actual process of growing them look like? Like, have you looked into that?
Yeah, so it's essentially, like, at the moment it's not yet scaled up to a full production level. They're getting close to it, but it's still kind of at the stage of almost like lab work. So you take a biopsy, you put that in a petri dish, you put a nutrient mix around it, and it does its own thing, and it fills up your petri dish. Now that can obviously be scaled up to more complex production rates, and as I say, it's not there yet, but it is close. For example, in 2013, the first lab-grown hamburger was created, and that cost $300,000 for the one burger, and took over 2 years of work to produce that burger. So not ideal.
Yeah.
Now, now in 2021, the same company is able to produce a burger for $10. And so
that sounds more reasonable.
Certainly, yeah. It's still a bit pricey, but I think with mass adoption, mass adoption will come once the price comes down. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario, if you'll forget the pun. But I think that as more work is done and that trajectory continues, we can see it get to a price tipping point. And maybe all it will take is investment to sort of subsidize the production of it early on, and get people accepting of it, and that will allow the consumer demand to drive the production costs down.
Yeah.
Now I wanted to get into the idea of the primary cells, that is the cells that you biopsy from the part of the animal that you want to reproduce. So that means like essentially poking a hole in a chicken's breast and taking another chicken and poking a hole in its wing and all of that. Or you can take stem cells, and you can use stem cells, which are essentially unprogrammed cells that haven't been differentiated into different parts of the body yet. And you can get these from adult animals. It is easier to get them from immature animals or fetal animals. But if your aim is not to kill the animal, that may not be practical. But in any case, you can get stem cells, and they can, given the right environmental cues, i.e. the nutrient mix that they're in, the kind of surfaces that they're up against, the temperatures of the areas that they're in, those will all trigger the stem cell to form different parts of the animal based on the DNA that it contains. The pros of that is that stem cells will reproduce an awful lot faster than the primary cells that you take from the mature parts of the body. The downside is, well, I suppose another pro is that it's diverse. You can make a chicken wing or a chicken breast or whatever you want, or you know, obviously taken from a chicken, stem cells from a cow. You can create a steak or create whatever cut of meat you want based on your nutrient mix. However, the downside is that you need to know exactly what the nutrient and environmental factors that are needed to create those parts of the body are. And that's very difficult to ascertain, you know, from the outside watching an animal grow. So there would be probably a lot of trial and error there. But I think once that's mastered, that actually kind of, it provides an avenue for some really interesting results. So like, say, this is just wildly speculative, but say you want a mammoth steak. So you take a biopsy from an elephant, and maybe using some genetic manipulation to bring it closer to mammoth DNA, you then grow that in the environmental and nutritional factors required to like create a steak of mammoth, and you can be like, this is
Nice.
what mammoth tastes like.
Mammoth steak.
Or do the same thing with birds and produce a dinosaur steak.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they dug up some remains of mammoths and things like that. I'm sure we can do some kind of DNA sampling from some part of their body, recreate a mammoth, and then use it for sampling.
Yeah.
That sounds like Jurassic Park right there, but I really do believe that in like 10, 20 years we'll get there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, like that they never hit upon the idea in Jurassic Park of actually slaughtering any dinosaurs and serving the meat in the restaurants. As insanely expensive as that would probably have been.
Yeah, well, maybe we can patent that idea, and
Yeah.
make millions off of it.
So in the near term, we're probably going to see products, like I was saying, of undifferentiated meat products, like chicken nuggets, like burgers, like sausages. But as time goes on, the demand for meat is typical, or at least at the higher end of the market, is typically for specific cuts. So, you want your T-bone steak, you want your fillet, pork fillet, you want your pig belly. All of these cuts that have particular flavors and signature textures and tastes to them and all of that. So a lot of those flavors, textures, and tastes are from the context in which that meat grew. So is it next to a bone? Are there arteries running through it? Is there cartilage supporting it in a particular shape? Is it under tension? Is it under compression? Is this a part of the body that moves a lot? Are these thick muscle fibers that have been developed by moving a lot? And so those are all incredibly complex things to recreate without simply building the animal around it. And so that's an area that is kind of the holy grail of cultured meat, is to create that structure and those conditions that will result in, the perfect steak, so to speak.
Hey, if you love using YouTube, I recommend the free Chrome extension called TubeBuddy. It allows you to do some advanced keyword research, cut your publishing time in half, and also rank your videos higher in search. I use them when creating for all my 3 channels. They have a paid version as well, but I recommend starting with the free option for starters. They give you a lot of data when watching YouTube, also comparing your stats to other YouTube channels, and help me a lot to gain more subscribers and more viewers on my channels. As I said, it's a free Chrome extension, but please use the link down below in the comments. And if you go for the paid version, type in BornaTubers to get a discount of 20%. And now let's get back to the video.
Yeah.
And so that leads us into the sort of, I suppose, overall commonality between all of these methods. In each of these methods, you're producing essentially unstructured, is substrate the word? I'm not sure, but goo, if you want, or at least homogeneous meat type substance. So how do you get that structure? Well, there's a few ways. One of them that would apply across the board, of course, is 3D printing. And I I have a 3D printer over here, which I was going to quickly pan the camera over to, but it has actually finished its print, so it's not doing anything anymore. But the basic theory of that is that you run your substance down a tube into a nozzle, which deposits it on the surface. It draws a 2-dimensional shape, and then it lifts it and draws another one, layer by layer by layer, and you build it up that way. So that will give you the shape of the food that you want. And 3D printing food is something that is happening now. I think it's something that will happen a lot more and in a lot more robust kind of way as the technology improves. But at the moment, it's sort of a curiosity. There are some restaurants you can go to that will 3D print you your dessert or 3D print a pizza for you. But most of these are novelties, and they require human intervention. There's one of the first dedicated food 3D printers out there that's sort of been brought to market as more than a bespoke machine in a curiosity restaurant is a pancake printer. And so it
cool.
prints out your pancake in whatever design you require and whatever additives you want. However, it still requires a human to come in and flip it. And I mean, it's not necessarily 100% desirable to remove the human from the process, but if we're talking about automated food production at a large scale, then we kind of want to minimize human interaction as much as possible. And particularly, I mean, one of the benefits of lab cultured meat is the cleanliness that you can achieve. Because as unpleasant as it is to acknowledge, you know, slaughterhouses are not necessarily very clean places. You've got animals going through traumatic events. You can have fecal matter mixed in with the meat. They're heavily medicated generally. You know, there's lots of antibiotics, and antibiotic resistance is a major problem for medicine in particular.
And steroids as well to make them bigger, to grow muscle mass.
Yeah, exactly. So all sorts of medications and toxins and bacteria, all sorts of contaminants get into our meat production processes. And that's very unfortunate. However, if you're culturing meat from a biopsy that's been taken in a clinical environment, and then that the meat that you're actually packaging up has never actually touched the living animal, then you can control that environment to a very high degree, and you don't need to use medication. You don't need to wash it in any kind of chemical, rub down any kind of pesticides,
sanitizing process and everything.
Exactly.
The ideal would be then to find a sheep, cow, chicken that's like the healthiest possible without any like chemicals thrown into it, just so that the biopsy sample would be as good as it could get.
Exactly, yeah. And if you think about the implications of that as well, if we are getting the majority of our meat from cultured meat, then herd sizes go down massively. That's great for the environment. It reduces the methane output of the livestock, reduces carbon output from transport. And it reduces land use as well. I mean, 95% less land use for a cultured meat production facility, because you don't need massive fields to have these animals on. You don't need to feed the animals the amount of food that they would need to eat. So herd reduction, and I hope when it comes to it that the herds that do exist are allowed to die off naturally, rather than just disposing of them. That would be very unfortunate. But it means that what animals do exist to provide the starter cells for these meat cultures will live in the lap of luxury. They will be kept in wonderful conditions, and be kept very, very well, very happy. So I think, like, ethically speaking, cultured meat is a wonderful thing. I can't think of many downsides. I mean, maybe if we're talking about herd reduction, there could be an issue way down the line of like genetic stagnation of the existing supply of animals, because the gene pool reduces so much. That could be an issue. And you do need to keep taking biopsies, because the cultured meat, any kind of meat that you're growing for any length of time, of course, can develop cancers. It can have genetic replication errors. And so you have all sorts of problems like that. So you do need to keep cows and pigs, as a thing. But there's lots of interesting implications for all of this.
Cool, but basically it incentivizes us to keep biodiversity and keep the animals that we eat, or not eat anymore, but use them for supplying the genetic material, to be in as good as possible environment and keep their quality high, which is kind of nice and a humane thing to do.
Yeah, it certainly removes a lot of the humanitarian concerns around veganism and vegetarianism. It'd be interesting to see what percentage of vegans and vegetarians then switch over to eating meat. I mean, I know a lot of them do it for nutritional reasons as well as ethical. So yeah, it'd just be interesting to see how that pans out. The other thing I want to say, though, that it may be obvious to the listeners that when we talk about 3D printing as a solution to the structure problem in cultured meat, that does solve the shape problem, but it doesn't necessarily solve the other issues, such as whether it's under tension, what materials it's in the proximity to, blood flow, and all of that. So that is an issue. Oh, I just remembered what a negative of cultured meat is, and it's the blood flow issue. So currently, most cultured meat is cultured in a liquid, and that liquid is sort of a nutritional blood mix, and the best place to get that is from the wombs of pregnant calves or pregnant cows, and the calves. I think it's like in the what you call that cord between the mother and the baby? I'm blanking. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the ugly side of it, that at the moment, that is the source for the growth medium in which the meat is cultured. And it makes sense, because that is the growth medium for the meat that we eat already. That's how we make cows. And so that's an unfortunate ethical dilemma for them. But that itself, I think, can be cultured as well. So while harvesting that at the moment does involve killing, at the very least, the calf and probably the mother, that may be something that can be streamlined so that it has minimal impact on the calf and the mother. And there are studies underway to find nutritionally identical but non-lethal substances that can be used for the same reason. So fingers crossed and touch wood, there is a way to produce this meat in a way that doesn't involve death.
Okay.
And the other thing about the structure is that there are lots of really cool innovations coming up that have lots of medical cross benefits as well. So there's ways of growing muscle in essentially the same way that meat is being cultured, and essentially that is what cultured meat is. It's muscle fibers, but they're growing it, and they're also running periodic pulses of electricity through it. And
to simulate a heartbeat?
Simulate a heartbeat or simulate the motion of a limb.
Nice.
And so it's giving the meat that texture that comes from tension. Now, the source of this research is the medical industry, because they're looking to grow organs and grow hearts, grow muscle, to graft into people who've been injured. But I don't see why there can't be overlap there. There's also research into developing cartilage, and it's a really interesting way that they've done this, because if you grow a replacement ear for somebody in a mold that's shaped like their missing ear, then what you will get is something that looks like an ear but is really floppy, because it hasn't had any of the growth stresses put on it as it grew. So I can't remember who did this, and it's something that I'm just remembering off the top of my head now, but there was a team that developed a computer program that could sort of reverse engineer the growth process of cartilage, and would then 3D print a living cartilage structure that, put into a growth medium and allowed to culture, would grow. And it's almost like it unfolds, but that's the wrong word, because it's sort of a combination of unfolding, inflating, stretching, self
Grows
scaffolding
around
almost.
it.
Yeah, it grows around itself, because the
Mhm.
way they print it has certain stressors inside the structure, and so
Hmm.
as it grows, then, and it when initially printed, it looks like a crumpled ball of paper, but as it grows, it unfurls, and you've got the ear shape then, and it's an ear that has the right flexibility and the right
Ah,
rigidity in various parts of it. So that's a really interesting medical technique that could probably be applied to cultured meat as well,
very
because you
interesting.
need collagen structures within the meat to define these shapes.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so there's solutions to all of the issues that lab-grown meat is facing at the moment. And I, for one, I like meat too much to stop eating it. Um, yeah, it's unethical of me, but I just like the taste of animals more than I like the animals. Sorry.
Okay.
So if I can have my cake and eat it, then great.
Yeah, that would be great. I kind of feel the same way. I've done like vegan days, and I had 1 vegan week, and
A vegan veek. Sorry.
um, yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I'm still a meat eater, and plan to be for well, until we do more of these solutions that are kind of like on the same level. I think I'll stay a meat eater. One thing that we did eat recently was actually the Beyond Meat burger, and that was something interesting.
Yeah, I should have
Um,
mentioned that in the fungus section, because
yeah, I just wanted to say
that's
that
what
that was
that
an
was made of.
interesting experience because it tasted really, really good, and that I would be okay
Mm,
with eating something like that. So that's pretty close to the original. But for everybody who
agreed.
doesn't know, can you tell us what's the Beyond Meat burger? I'm sure that some people have heard about it. What is it? How does it work? How is it made? And tell us your experience with the Beyond Meat burger.
Sure. So it's fungus based as well. It's mycoprotein stretched out. I suppose mycoprotein is a fungus that grows in a network of fibers, and uh, it almost looks like brain matter when you look at it under a microscope, in the sense that it's a three-dimensional network. Um, and the way that it's cultured, then it's grown to the desired mass, and then uh, heated to kill the fungus off. But as it's heated, it's also stretched, so it
Mhm.
it brings it into a more muscle-like fiber density and connectivity model.
Okay.
And that produces the sort of telltale feeling of meat. And you and I can attest that when you bite into that burger, it has that springiness, it has the sort of the tear, um, and through a number of other processes, including the addition of truffle oil and various other nutrients and so on, it has that juiciness
Hmm.
and the fat content of meat. Um, it was really good. Like you were saying, if you didn't know, you would just assume it was a burger with some particularly earthy flavors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I could definitely feel that it's a little bit softer,
yeah,
but not by a lot, So
no, it was like a particularly tender burger.
yeah.
Yeah, and they fried it with a quite a crust on each side, which I thought made for a really nice
Hmm.
texture experience. It was really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I feel that I haven't tried any burgers like that before.
Mm.
And I have a feeling that if we did a blind testing at someone's place for a barbecue and you gave someone a burger, I feel that if you kind of like didn't mention it at all, and that if someone wasn't paying like really, really high attention to it, that they wouldn't know the difference at all, especially
Mm.
after a few pints. But um,
Yeah, for sure.
when when you specifically go after trying a burger like that, you obviously notice the difference. But I can see how it will be used in the future for astronauts or even for mass production here on Earth and other planets where we'll go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the thing I wanted to say. Thank you. The reason each of these methods is so much more advantageous for space travel in particular, but also for life here on Earth, is the reduction in the amount of space used. And the really alarming statistic that I've come across while researching this is that in order to feed the expected population of the world of 10 billion, the ratio of meat that we eat at the moment, in order to keep that up for the growing population of the world, it means we're going to run out of arable land, because obviously the meat that we eat also eats grain products. So we need to grow grain in surplus to what the human population needs in order to feed our meat. And we're literally not going to have enough land on planet Earth to feed humanity. Modern farming techniques have reduced the amount of land needed massively. And I mean by modern, meaning the ones that we're using now and for the last few decades. But it's not enough. So we need an alternative, or we need new methods. And as tasty and awesome as that burger was, I can't imagine people stopping eating meat altogether in favor of options like that, not least because of issues with, for example, in fungus-based meats, you lack things like iron and zinc. Those have to be fortified into the burgers or into the meat. Mm-hmm. So that adds complexity, potentially adding cost. So I think if we have ways to industrially create the meat that we need, which is nutritionally complete and doesn't involve animal murder, that's the holy grail. And also obviously reduces the amount of space needed. And we're talking about like a meat production facility that uses 5% of the land area of a meat farm, and that's not even counting the land use for growing the grain that those animals then eat. Massive reductions in carbon output, in water consumption, and of course, because it's smaller, you can locate that closer to the customer as well. So you can have meat factories on the suburbs of cities. The product getting to the supermarket is fresher. Yeah, it employs people locally and uses far less carbon.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those are some great stats there, and I'm gonna address some of them as well in my part. But yeah, so apart from the lab grown meat and the fungus grown meat and the algae meat, is there anything else that we're missing there?
Well, there is insectoid meat, which is a pretty big topic on its own, which I don't know enough about to really go into at the moment. But I mean, it's a staple diet for some parts of the world already. So it's something that, you know, is utterly normal for a lot of human beings. Yep. But I think for our Western sensibilities, it's still a bit icky, particularly for people.
I always kind of had the wish to travel to, I think in Thailand or one of the Asian countries there. Like you can normally go to like an open market on the streets where people sell everything from scorpions to cockroaches to like whatever insect you can find. Basically, they put them on small sticks and grill them, and you can eat them like chips and snacks on the street, you know, and people buy them in bags and take them. And I was always like, yeah, I'm going to do that one day, you know, but still like visualizing it, it's still kind of like, ooh, would it be a little bit too much, you know?
I get a scratchy throat thinking about it because like the legs and the carapace.
I would definitely do it with having some liquids next to me, you know, as soon as I start eating it, I'll probably wash it down. But then again, imagine yourself doing it like 500 times when like you didn't have a choice. It'll probably be second nature. It'll probably be second nature. So we'll save that for another episode, but definitely interesting. I think that the first one that they started experimenting with was what are they called?
Grubs?
Grasshoppers. Yeah.
Ah, yes.
Grasshoppers. Yeah. And they also have a lot of protein and are supposedly really good. So yeah.
And sure, in Australia they eat grubs. The Aboriginals eat grubs all the time, which are these big fat like white worm things.
Yeah.
And as gross as it is, it kind of looks tasty. I've always kind of wanted to try a grub.
Yeah. Yeah.
They pick them right out of the ground and eat them.
Mm. Yeah.
And to also again link it to science fiction, because I mean, like, we're talking about the future here. We're talking about future technology, future food. It naturally links with science fiction. I just remember this book, and I wish I could remember the title of it, that my dad was reading, and he was getting a great kick out of it because he loves the loved the English language, and any kind of fancy words that he could learn, he was always thrilled to learn. And he was reading away in the corner, and he turns around to me and he goes, entomophagic. I was like,
You're like, what?
what? And he goes, entomophagy. What do you think that is? And I had to think about it. I couldn't figure it out. And he told me the eating of insects, entomophagy, the culinary art of preparing insects for human consumption. And there was this science fiction book he was reading about a colony on the moon. And the main character had been sort of shanghaied into going to the moon, and had been knocked out and flown to the moon, and woke up in the infirmary on this moon base. And the description in the book said, as he came to, entomophagic smells wafted in from the kitchen. So
amazing.
Maybe we'll all become familiar with entomophagic smells in the future.
Yes. What's your favorite hobby? Entomophology.
Yeah.
Like, what? You're collecting post stamps? Not quite. Yeah. Let's put that on a to-do list, or to try list, because I definitely want to try that as well. There's a bunch of stuff that I want to try from the animal kingdom and plant kingdom as well, that are not readily available in your local supermarket. So we'll have to put in a little bit more effort into that.
We should check the pet shops.
All right. I'm sure we'll get some angry comments on this on the podcast.
Here's hoping.
But yeah, I would like to hear from the listeners. What's like one of the things that we mentioned here? Did you try any of the new burger types or meat types that are coming? Probably the answer will be no. But maybe we can ask a question of what's the most exotic thing you've eaten. That might be a more colorful answer line, where we get different things from people who have traveled the world and tried maybe different things. I remember a story when I got a call from a friend of mine who was going regularly to one of these like huge shops. I don't know if you have Metro here in Ireland, but basically a huge chain of shops, and they kind of specialize into providing local restaurants and small business owners with large quantities of food that are not truck large, but like pallet large. So here and there they would get some like one shipment delivery of something, and he would go there just to see what it is. And one day it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, and he's like, dude, do you want to eat alligator? And I'm like, what? He's like, do you want to eat alligator? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just waking up. Like, I probably don't want to have it for breakfast.
Is that a euphemism?
And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm open to the idea. And he's like, all right, cool. And he hangs up. And I'm like, all right, what's going on, So basically he calls me later and he's like, I've been to the shop. I'm planning to do a barbecue and I want to buy a few kilos of, well, at least 1 kilo of alligator meat. He came back the other day, somebody bought it and he was super depressed. And then he calls me like, dude, do you want to eat buffalo? And I'm like, yeah, man, let's do it. Like, let's get some buffalo. And then, no, sorry, it was zebra. The second time he called me, he found zebra. And then it happened that they had too much zebra meat and they were selling it in bulk. So he couldn't buy like 2 kg of zebra. So he had to buy like 10 kg of zebra. And he was like, I don't have any space to put it anywhere. I don't have the money right now. So we skipped the zebra, and then he bought, I think it was buffalo or some form of those like cow-like creatures with big horns. They're not stags. I don't know the English word for it.
I Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's not caribou. No, they're like
Probably not.
deer. Uh,
I'll find the pictures and post them here after the show. So people who are watching this on the YouTube channel of the Uncle Gold podcast will probably see a big animal right here. And the that's basically what we made a stew out of. And it was nice. And I love the idea of this, like, hey man, I found some like exotic meat. We should do a grill out, cookout or something and then try it.
the most exotic thing I've eaten is probably, well, wild boar is a close second, and that was incredibly delicious. My God, it was so good. But the most exotic thing is probably kangaroo. There was like a brief period back when I was in college when the supermarkets in Ireland were suddenly stocking kangaroo meat for some reason. And yeah, it was pretty good. It's oddly spongy though. You'd think it would be like tough because it's you know,
muscular,
such taut muscle. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's almost liver like in its texture. So it's got a sponginess to it and sort of absorbed sauce. I wasn't mad about it, to be honest. I think I prefer
1
them
out of 10.
alive.
How much would you give it?
I would say 7, but that's maybe giving it a point for novelty as well.
Yeah. Compared to how much would you give the Beyond Meat burger? 1 out of 10?
I would give that a solid 8.5, probably.
Yeah. I would say 8. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're going on fidelity to real meat, I'd probably give it a 7. But overall, on just being a really delicious food, I think it was a solid 8.5.
Yeah, definitely. As we're speaking, I just had lunch because I knew that this episode would kind of make me think about food a lot, but I'm still getting hungry while I'm listening to this. So I apologize for everyone listening. If you're being hungry because of this podcast, like, guys, grab
it's a
something
good
to
indicator that when I think of that burger, I salivate.
Yeah,
really good burger.
Happens to me with Beyond Meat burger that we tried.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about as well. Yeah. We have had, I have eaten several other sort of fake meat. Yeah, let's just call a spade, fake meat items over the years. I had a I can't remember what the company name was, but in Burger King they have an alternate meat thing, and I thought it was the Beyond Meat burger, but it was a different company, and it was sort of pedestrian. It tasted gray, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
As opposed to the rich brown sort of meaty flavor, it was a kind of a gray flavor.
Yeah.
So a bit bland, a bit strange, but not altogether terrible. And the texture was really good. It was very like meat. And then I cannot remember what the brand names, or I think I had beetroot based burgers, which were very kind of identifiably vegetable based, but were still quite good. And then there was some kind of steak I had as well, but I can't remember what that was made from. We need to do, as we've been discussing, we need to do a coordinated shop and go and find these items and figure out. I don't know if we would each try different ones or we'd try the same ones and kind of give our marks out of 10 for each of them. That's probably the more interesting way to take it, isn't it?
We'll figure it out. Yeah, it'll probably be the same one and give our kind of impressions and ideas about it. For everyone who's just tuning in, so me and Brendan were talking about trying as many of these alternative or new foods that are on the market right now. And we only tried one together up until now, and we'll definitely show you some footage of that. But we were like, maybe we should do this like a really like a dedicated episode to it, and just try anything that we can get our hands on and do like a comparison to regular meat. So if any of the companies listening that are producing food alternatives, feel free to send us shipments our way. Me and Brendan are definitely going to try them out and send you our reviews back.
Shipping crate arrives.
Hello, there's a truck for you waiting outside. Like, what? What? That would be amazing, actually. Like, I would appreciate it. I would definitely do a in-depth episode about that.
Oh, for sure. But I wouldn't appreciate the storage costs. Like finding a dozen freezers.
All right. Let's hypothetically run it through. So what will we do? We'll probably store as much as we could. Then you still have like 98% of the truck left.
Yeah. Would it be ethical to sell that? Would it be possible to sell that?
No, we would probably have to do a YouTube video where we give out a truck full of meat, like
Yes.
Mr. Beast style, and then go to schools and feed children, go to homeless people, homeless shelters, find a restaurant and talk to the chef how he would prepare that food and create like a new dish that will be there. I think we could do like an awesome episode, film it nicely, do some B-roll and stuff like that. I think that would be a really cool episode.
Well, given that it's definitely going to happen, we should totally do that.
Yeah. So definitely we'll provide our addresses below in the descriptions for all the companies interested in it.
Yeah, but if you're like a weirdo or a pervert, don't bother us. Now we're covered.
Dude, what could go wrong?
Yeah, I know.
All right. Let's not mess with the internet gods.
Yeah.
All right. What's next on the list, Brendan?
I think I'm done. I think it's your turn, man. So, like, what have you been looking into?
Cool. So I haven't been working on meat as you have. I was more focused on the plant side of things. And I'm going to focus on vertical farming. For everyone who hears it for the first time, it comes in a few different forms, but the basic idea of it that the amount of land it takes to produce like vegetables like salad, spinach, kale, and things like that is enormous. So people started stacking them upwards and planting them basically in warehouses, in controlled environments, providing the sunlight with artificial lights, and basically increase the yield that they have from vegetables. So that's the basic idea. Let's try to touch on a few points that you also mentioned earlier, which are the problems with how regular farming is done so far. First of all, it takes a lot of space, and if you've ever been on a farm, you know that sometimes you can't see the end of it, and then the amount of time it takes to produce the vegetables, it's also really long. It's very seasonal, so every plant has a specific time when it's grown because it depends on the influence of nature. And speaking of influence of nature, it can always happen that you have a storm or hailstorm or flood or drought or whatever nature throws at you. You're kind of at the mercy of that.
Yeah,
and,
we had that kind of situation a couple of years ago with that very hot summer. Was it last year? Year before?
Was it 26
Who
degrees?
knows? Well, I can't remember exactly, but like, who knows?
Sorry, that was a joke. Sorry.
Oh, I apologize. Not one I got. Unfortunately, we're having a great time with jokes today. But yeah, a couple of years ago, like there were Ireland-based crisp companies like O'Donnell's. Is it O'Donnell's Crisps? I remember they were on the radio and they were crying foul because the weather was so dry that they were not going to be able to have enough potatoes to fill their quota for crisps, to make enough crisps for the market, which was just mad. And that's exactly what you're talking about, the volatility of farming year on year. It's entirely based on the weather. And yeah, this is such a simple solution. Take it indoors, stack it up.
Yeah, it's very slick actually, and especially when you see videos of it online, it looks very futuristic. It looks very like somebody went to 2300 and like that's obvious how people should do farms. Like, why haven't we thought about it earlier? And I'll address why we haven't done it in the last, let's say, 20 years. But some of the other problems that we have with standard farming is the CO2 emissions. So when you plant the plants, you obviously have to use large machinery to take care of them, to take care of the earth, then put pesticides on, then farm it, then ship it. And all of that, each part of that process produces a huge amount of CO2. Second thing that I just mentioned is pesticides. So since the vegetables are out in the open, they're subject to also a lot of not just bacteria, but also insects that kind of destroy your crop, go there and either spread diseases or eat half of your crop, birds flying over and eating half of your corn or tomatoes or whatever you're planting.
Or contaminating it.
Sorry?
Or contaminating it with their droppings.
Or contaminate, yeah. Birds sometimes carry diseases, sometimes insects, like you can't predict that stuff. So farmers usually are required to use a lot of pesticides. So to prevent a bird or insect spreadable disease, you would use a lot of chemicals to kind of create a safe environment for consumers, which is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because then if you put so much chemicals on a plant, the plants basically absorb everything that they come in contact with. So if you put chemicals on them, they'll unfortunately take in some chemicals as well. So the things that we're eating on a regular basis is not super ultra healthy. So you have smaller gardens that are completely bio and completely GMO free and no pesticides, but they can't produce that much yield in that much quantity. So people started doing this indoor farming first in houses, just you plant some chili peppers in your house and it works, right? But then people started taking it more inside. And there was also the concern of soil degradation, because when you use so many pesticides and when you farm year after year on the same place, you basically exhaust the earth of all the nutrients that it has on the surface level, because most plants that we eat, they don't have roots that go like 20 meters deep, right? They're like 10 centimeters or half a meter, so it's not very large. So after a few years, you basically exhaust the earth out of nutrients, and then there's this really cool thing that farmers do. Not all of them, of course, but it's called cyclical farming, where you have like 4 spots on farms, and then on 3 of them you plant plants each year, and then you leave one for 1 year to rest, and then you switch the 3, and then another one rests for the next year, and then the 3rd year you switch it again, and in the 4th you basically complete the cycle and leave always one resting, and you repeat that. So the earth has enough time to get all the nutrients back from the rain, from the manure, and from basically the plants dying there. So that's the most natural process of doing it.
And so they would graze animals on these resting fields, would they?
Yeah, they sometimes bring cows there or sheep. Sometimes they don't do anything with the land. They just like cut the grass, so the grass disintegrates and kind of the field fuels itself. But yeah, most of the time they would use animals for that. That's the cyclical way, but it's still not as efficient as you'll hear now from the vertical farming industry.
Because you're still using 4 fields, which are 4 enormous areas of land.
Yeah, and you're not using one, so it's like a lot of capacity wasted. And then people came up with a brilliant idea, like, why are we going horizontally? Why don't we just go vertically? And they started stacking up plants on top of each other.
But doesn't the same problem apply there? I mean, one, do you exhaust the soil in your vertical stack?
No, because in most of these vertical farms, they're not using soil. Boom.
It's hydroponic.
It is, and it's self-explanatory. I actually shout out to Marek, the friend of ours who was kind of strongly argumenting the concept of hydroponics, and I'll address it a little bit later. But basically, what people started doing with vertical farms is that I'll divide this into like a few categories. First one would be water that we mentioned earlier. Light would be the second one, and automation would kind of be the third one. So first of all, you don't waste a lot of space. You have everything indoors. One of the main benefits is that you're literally proofing your farms from all the bacteria, all the birds, all the insects, and you don't have to use pesticides because of it. So just because you're indoors, you're shielded from all the negative side effects. Plus, there's no hailstorm, there's no floods, there's no anything that can destroy your plants. There's no strong winds or extreme heat. So you basically have
like the meat culture. It's a controlled environment.
Exactly. The controlled environment is very important here, because not only can you you not only do you don't have to use pesticides, basically the plants that are grown in vertical plants are so clean because they don't have any soil or dust on them that you don't even have to wash them. People literally eat them off the farms because it's super healthy. First, let's go to the part with light. That will answer the question, why haven't we started doing this earlier? Because the concept of stacking plants is pretty self-explanatory. The problem with indoor farming is that you don't have natural light, and plants need light to grow, of course.
Yeah,
so
that was the first question I had when you were describing the stacks. It was like shadows?
Yes. Most companies put lights underneath each shelf. So each row of plants gets their own light. Or the alternative is they do them vertically on sides of walls where they put lights in between them, and then both sides of the plant stacks are kind of being illuminated by one lamp standing in the middle. So that's two versions of how vertical farming is done, either horizontal rows or like columns and walls stacked vertically. But basically both variants are saving a lot of space. And the reason why we're now able to use indoor lights is because that the price of LED lights has dropped down year after year after year. A great example would be, do you remember buying Christmas lights? Like when you were a kid, they were probably super expensive, and they were like single light.
I wouldn't know.
Well,
I was a kid. I wasn't buying them.
Yeah, you just got them. But basically, if you even remember how they looked, there was like one light, and there was like a cord, and then another light here, and then every like 10 centimeters you would have another light. So you couldn't have a lot of bulbs in one place at the same time because they were expensive, and they would break easily.
And also they heat up and
heat up.
Too many of them together. Yeah.
So fast forward a few years later, LED technology gets super advanced. So we have a lot more lights in a smaller place. It's a lot easier to produce them. Their effectiveness rate has gone up 85%. And they're basically a lot cheaper because mass manufacturing, mass production. So
and the technology is continually improving as well. I mean, the light spectrum that comes off a white LED now is much more complete than it was on white LEDs like 10 years ago. You run that through a spectral analysis, and there's like spikes from the old ones, and the new ones are just a complete wave.
Yes. Also, their shelf life, no, not shelf life, along the
operational life.
Operational life has gone up by a few years. So that's amazing. And basically the research around light and photons is also moving forward. So our understanding of light in general is also going up, and we better know which photons are for what and how to kind of use it concentrated. Everything from lasers to normal LED lights that we have, our understanding is better, and that's why we can create better lights for what we need on a day-to-day basis. That's also,
so when you say what photons are for what, do you mean like in terms of what the plant needs, or just in general?
that was my next point, actually. Not all plants need all the photons in the light spectrum. So when you look at light, it's basically a rainbow of different colors, of millions of different ones. And the human eye can't see all of them. Plants don't need all of them. So if we create a light bulb that creates all specters of light, we basically don't need it. So what they do with LED lights, they narrow it down to a certain portion of light that is emitted, and they use that in vertical farming to stimulate growth. And they can even manipulate like crispiness of the plant, or for example, they can manipulate the taste of a certain plant by adding more blue light or red light, which are the most two common types of light that they use to grow indoor farming. They use white light, of course, but during the night period, because plants need their nighttime resting period, they basically turn on the blue and red light to kind of stimulate either flavor or crispiness, or if a plant is going really, really slow, then they would stimulate speed of growth. So with our
like a remote control for the growth of the plant.
Exactly. So with our understanding of light, how it works, we can influence farming and basically increase productivity in farming by a lot. I wanted to talk about yield here for a second, because what some of the companies report here for yield is amazing. The lowest number that I could find for a vertical farm company was 50x of the yield from produce on a square foot.
Compared to traditional farms.
Compared to traditional farms, yes.
Wow.
So that's the smallest number I could find, and I looked into a few companies there. The highest number, the highest number that I could find is 400x. So 400 times more yield on a square foot per vegetable. So it doesn't apply to all vegetables, but for simple vegetables that are easy to farm, like lettuce, spinach, and kale, you would have up to 400%, 400 times, not percent, more yield through a year-on basis.
Wow.
That's absolutely mind-blowing, yeah.
So that begs the question, I suppose, then, of like, when you're talking about simpler vegetables, spinach, kale, lettuce, I can imagine those growing in these hydroponic systems. And I suppose maybe you should describe that, how the hydroponics work and what that really means.
Sure.
But the follow-on question I'm getting to is, what about root vegetables, potatoes, carrots? How do those work if they don't have soil to work in?
Let's tackle that question first. So most vertical farm companies don't go for root vegetables because they need soil, and they're usually grown without direct light at the start. So if you have a light-based infrastructure for that, you're kind of not doing it right, because at the start they don't need it. Plus they need a lot more space. Plus you kind of can't go vertically a lot with them. So for now, what I have found is people don't go for like carrots, potatoes, beetroots, and things like that, everything that basically grows underground. They basically go for vegetables that have a small root, because how they do it is that they don't use soil. They create these small cups and they place the seed of the plant in something like a sponge, where it sits so it doesn't fall through the holes, and then they germinate it for a few days in a chamber where the environment is optimum, with air moisture and the earth, the temperature, everything is monitored. They leave it for a few days there until the roots start growing through these small cups, until they get a little bit outside, and where you see a little like sprout coming out of the sponge. Sure. At that point, they take it basically to the vertical farms, where they basically mimic the same process as in earth, but just without the earth. And they let them either hang in tubes or in these small cups, and they provide it with water. Now, there are three ways how they do it with water. And basically in all three, the plants grow larger roots so they can absorb more water, which feeds more nutrients to the leaves and their product, like let's say like a strawberry, like you could still do it there. So basically the plants start absorbing a lot of water, and the nutrients that they get actually comes from the water, because usually when you plant a plant in earth, you get a lot of nutrients there. So water is just added to kind of help things along that the plant grows, but here you get the nutrients in the water. So there are three ways how basically these companies handle the water supply and water management. The first one is our favorite one, is the hydroponic one. That basically means that the bottom part of the plant is in water. So the root and everything up to the green part that you see usually sticking out of the ground is submerged into water. And what they do is they have little pumps that circulate the water basically from...
In a spiral?
Spiral is one of the options if you have like a tube-based vertical farm, but a lot of them have like shelves. So they use a pump that takes the water up to the top one, and then it goes down basically through rows of plants, or they have it for each shelf that the plants are basically in like a really small pool of water, and it sits there for a while so that the plants can absorb it, and then with pumps they pump it back out into a tank that's on the somewhere outside. They
It's kind of
refill it.
reminding me a little bit of like, I think they're rice fields that
Mhm.
you'd see in traditional Asian farming that are like cut into the mountain like shelves,
Yeah,
and you've
yeah.
got the water flowing down through each of them. It sounds like a miniaturized version of that.
That actually sounds exactly like that, and especially because the roots of the vegetables connect to each other since they don't have a lot of earth. They basically underneath those mini cups, they connect roots together. And the last time we were having this walk and talk, we were talking about how plants communicate with each other underground. They basically do it with their root systems. They
Yeah.
basically connect like hands like this, and they talk to each other, which is great because they create little ecosystems for themselves, but also help each other gather more nutrients from the water. So it's like a
Wow.
net that stops the nutrients from flowing through the water. It stays in the roots, and then they absorb it up into the plant, which is an
And
amazing system.
Yeah, that sounds beneficial because of one of the things you were talking about when we were having that walk and talk was that in nature, trees in particular was your example anyway, they can become quote unquote aware of another tree that is in need of nutrients, and they can actually donate nutrients from themselves through the root system to this other tree. Is there any
Yes.
evidence? Does that come into play in these?
Unfortunately, no. Maybe on a really small, really fast scale where they will catch more nutrients together. But basically, they have enough nutrients, so they are in basically optimum conditions. So they kind of don't have the need for it. But there was this,
if that does arise, then that's a failing in the growers.
Yeah, basically. The thing that you mentioned was from a TED talk, and it was amazing. The guy was talking about how plants basically increase their pH level or decrease it based on what type of nutrients they're getting, or if there's like toxic rain falling in one part of the forest, the other part of the forest knows, and they're kind of like friends standing next to each other. We think of them as just like trees doing nothing, but they're like really communicating to each other. They have their internet of their own, in a way. But going back to the vertical farms, so the hydroponic system basically supplies plants with water that's filled with nutrients, and then when the nutrients are depleted, they cycle the water out into tanks on the side. They fill the water up with new nutrients, and then they cycle the water back up. So basically, this whole system is also super efficient because it uses not just less ground, not just less space, not just infinitely stackable on top of each other, but also 99% less water is used in vertical farming. So basically, this hydroponic system, you basically have 99% of your water all the time in there, and you don't need new one. You just fill it up with bacteria again and nutrients for the plants, and just recycle it again to the whole system of plants. So that's the first version of supplying nutrients. The second version is aeroponics, where you basically stack plants in again shelves, and then from underneath the roots are just hanging there, and you spray water and nutrients towards them. So it kind of creates this rainforest effect, and they're not in water all the time. So they just get
an aerosol.
Yes, it's like the sprinklers that you have on your front yard that are kind of like gently sprinkling water on top of the grass, and then the grass absorbs it, and then it becomes green and nice. That's exactly that process. So they, again, in tanks outside, they fill it up with nutrients. They don't have it dipped into water, submerged. They spray water onto their roots. That's the second version of how they supply water and nutrients to it.
And what are the arguments, for one or the other? Is it down to which crop you're growing, which version suits better?
I didn't find basically any of them. I think it's just preference on how the factory wants to be constructed, because you could spray plants from both sides, on the leaves and on the roots. Of course, you have to spray them on the roots, but if you do that system, you can do it from both sides. If you're submerging submerging them into water, you can basically just do it from one side, and then you would have to, I don't know, if you want, you can do a sprinkler system on the other side as well. But there's no counter argument, so both systems work really, really good, really efficient, and they're both legit. So it's just a preference of the manufacturer how they want to do it and construct the whole facility.
I'd imagine maintenance is easier with the flow system rather than the aerosol, because
Probably.
you might get some degradation of your equipment with aerosols.
Yeah, and when you're spraying the water, of course, in that state, water tends to, like evaporate around. So you'll probably have to have a more sealed system than in the hydroponic one. But both systems work. Even if the water gets sprayed and goes out, where will it land? On the other shelf of plants that are just above it, So you're still doing a good thing there, and I don't think that's a problem. Actually, I think it's just benefits the plants.
You probably want the aeroponic system if you're doing it in zero gravity. I'm always thinking of things in terms of space, of course.
Yeah.
Because if you're in zero G, you're flowing water past the roots. It's going to float around anyway. So might as well just be spraying it everywhere.
That's probably the strongest argument for aeroponics. And the third system of supplying nutrients and water is, again, just to finish this point. So again, you're using a lot less water because all the water stays there. It's in the facility, in the system, on the roots. And when you're sprinkling it, you're not using almost any water because it's super, you're just basically spraying particles of water. And then again, they also get absorbed, and through the boxes where the plants are, they get accumulated on the bottom and then again filled up with nutrients. So you're using the same water over and over again, which is amazing. The third way is where you're not artificially filling it up with nutrients. You basically create another system that stacks next to the vertical farm. This method is called Aquaponics, and you basically use fish for that. So imagine having a vertical farm right next to the fish pond or a huge pool that you create for it. You put in a school of fish inside, and they live in their own ecosystem. But through living and consuming algae and everything from the water, they create waste. So this system uses the waste that the fish create to supply the plants with nutrients, because they basically eat that, right? And when you put all of that water through all of these plants, the plants basically filter the water so it becomes clean at the end of that process. And what you get at the end is clean water that you again circle back to the fish. So fish get clean water, plants get dirty water from the fish that's full with nutrients that they eat and absorb. Plants filter out the water and cycle it back to the fish. So the basically thing that you have to add here is fish food for the fish. Some people also try to do that by introducing two types of fish, one eating the other, but then you need huge pools and stuff like that. So most people feed the fish that they have inside. And you would think that that's something that the biggest farm companies use. That's actually the ones that the smallest ones use the most. And I've seen a lot of videos where people would create a small 2x2 pool in their house with 20 fish inside, and create a small vertical farm in their house that uses aquaponics as the source of nutrients for their plants, which is amazing.
Sorry, are the fish in this case, are they decorative? Are they pets, or are they used for eating?
Edible. So you get fish as a source of protein, and you basically just don't want to overfish them, so if you would take all of them, you would have to resupply them with the fish,
of course.
But basically what people do is once a week they take one fish out. Depends on how long the breeding process for the fish is and how their life cycle works, but basically on a regular basis you get fish out. That way you keep the pool empty enough so that fish have enough food to eat for themselves, and you get a fresh fish basically from your home. It's possible. I've seen amazing videos how people just build it for themselves, and it doesn't look too big. So it doesn't have to be like a swimming pool that's the size of someone's living room. It can be literally like a huge bucket, and that's enough nutrients for a bunch of plants. You could probably fill up your garage with vertical farming plants, and from a bucket of fish you would get enough nutrients to provide for all of these plants. You just have to solve the lighting problem, which is basically installing LED lamps and install pumps that would pump the water. And that's basically it. Once you have the system closed, it basically loops. You just have to figure out the research at what time the water gets swapped into which part of the cycle. That's the only thing, but that's pretty easy to figure out. And we have scientists today, and farmers who have done it for thousands of years. So that's the easy part. But I think it's a really cool way how to create like a biosphere and a system in itself of one biosphere feeding the other. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and of course the holy grail of again space exploration is a self-sustaining biosphere. If you want to create a colony on Mars, or even just run a long duration space voyage, you want to have some kind of system that has a complete closed loop of biological feedback, essentially. And that sounds like it's close to it, but no system like that is perfect. So are there any like downsides to these?
There are some downsides, but what we'll use for space, and it's already being used on Earth, is the automation level that kind of keeps all of that running. So apart from pumps and all of that, in a lot of cases, vertical farm companies have robot arms that are literally the whole process from putting the seed into the ground or the sponge and the small cups, to transferring it from tray to tray, to transferring it into the vertical farms themselves, to cutting them, to monitoring them. They have AI systems with small cameras attached on each of the shelves where they take pictures regularly to see how each batch of plants is growing. They QR code it, and then for the astronauts or for the consumers right now on Earth, you can basically scan the QR code and know which batch it's from, how it was treated. You have the whole provenance of the whole system. And I'm sure that at one point they'll put information like that on blockchain, as I discussed in the previous podcast with Fiona. There are projects like that are trying to monitor the whole life cycle of a product. And the human hand is prone to error. So sometimes we do make mistakes. With robot arms, automation, and basically streamlining the whole process like that, you could install a facility on Mars and basically nobody will have to go inside. It could be completely automated. You would just get fresh product on the outside as a, like a finished product. I'm sure there would have to be one technician that kind of monitors like the whole factory. But yield is amazing, so I'm sure that they will start using that on Mars and grow it. The only thing that I couldn't find is like, how will the difference in gravity impact plants, food, and stuff like that? Because I'm pretty sure that, especially for root vegetables, they figure out where to grow by what is pulling them down. So one part of the seed becomes heavier and one part of the seed becomes lighter, and then this one is going down, so that's where the gravity is pulling. Here we grow the roots, right? That's how the plant figures it out. And
well, they've successfully grown leaf vegetables like lettuce. I think they've grown tomatoes and some flowers as well on the International Space Station, which is zero gravity.
Nice.
So those plants have been able to work. Something you can do, which is sort of a background element in the Expanse, which I've always thought was a nice touch, is that they have a rotating drum in the kitchen with all their herbs in it. And so that's providing spin gravity to the plants. So they know which way is up because of centripetal. But on Mars, I don't think that'll be much of a concern because gravity is like 1/3 of Earth gravity there.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty concerted indication of which way is up for the seeds.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll figure it out, and that's the least of their problems.
Yeah.
So yeah, we covered the water, we covered the lights, we covered the automation part. The yield part is absolutely amazing. I have some stats here just to compare. So to grow food on a normal farm, you would need you could let's say you're farming lettuce on a normal standard farm, you could grow 4 kilograms per square meter of ground. On a vertical farm, you could get up to 80 between 80 and 120 kilograms of lettuce per year per square meter. So that's
Wow.
insane.
Yeah.
1 square meter of land uses usually 1,000 liters of water to produce those 4 kilograms of lettuce. Here you
Wow.
need 1 liter of water.
That's just stunning to think, like 1,000 liters
to
of
1.
water.
Yes.
For 4 lettuces.
Yeah. No, not 4 kg of lettuce. Yeah.
Oh, 4 kilograms. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, depending on what lettuce you're growing, it could be 4 lettuces. That's just
the main
nuts.
problem is that the water kind of falls through the ground, and
Right.
all the
So you got
rain that
losses.
we're getting is basically going through the top part where we need the water and the earth to be moist for the plants to be able to absorb it. But actually, in a short period of time, all the water drops down into the inner earth where, like there's rocks and underground rivers and underground lakes where basically nobody has any use of it. So
Sure. Well, I mean, it rejoins the hydrological cycle eventually.
Of course, but it takes it 16 years to get back to the sea, to evaporate, and the cloud to come back over your piece of land to get it. Here we do it in a matter of no time. And one more thing that is like a huge benefit for vertical farms is that by optimizing this whole process, they are able to decrease the time it takes to grow the plants. So not only are you getting more yield, you're getting it faster. They're decreasing it sometimes for some cases by months. For some of it, it's like 10 to 20 days. But basically, since you have them in optimum conditions, you don't have 3 months of farming, you have 365 days of farming. So that's
because it can be springtime all the time if you
it's all
calibrate
the time.
your lighting
it's all
right.
The time.
Wow.
And tracking everything, that's also huge. But going back to our versus model here between the old school farm and the vertical farm is the amount of miles that it takes for a product farmed in a regular farm to reach your table or the end consumer. For a regular vegetable, it would be around 2,000 miles would be the average. So we all know that cities are growing bigger and bigger, and the nearest farm, some people living like in Shanghai or New York don't see a farm in their whole lifetime. There's farm tourism where people from big cities are taken out to a farm, and then they for the first time see animals and green all around them, and they say like, oh wow, I couldn't even imagine it. So this is a real problem that's occurring. Vertical farms,
which by the way is a completely alien thought for someone from Ireland.
Yeah. Croatia as well. So basically, vertical farms are mostly done and built in cities because that's where this problem occurs. The main problem that people have in their nutrition today is that when you go into a large supermarket, you can buy 2 paprikas for like €3 or $3, and then you go to McDonald's and you buy a burger for $1. And that's a huge problem because people are going for the fast food that's not healthy, because getting the food that's nutrient rich and healthy and doesn't have any pesticides and that it's like good for you takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to bring it there. So the average miles that food from vertical farms has to cover to get to the end consumer or the supermarket is 43 miles compared to the 2,000 miles. And I'm saying this because that's the average number. So some plants need to travel for around 4,000 miles to get to the end consumer. And here we're losing a lot of benefits that vegetables and fruits have.
Because they're aging as they travel as well as anything else.
Exactly that. You remember when you go to the supermarket and let's say you want to buy bananas, they are basically still not ripe and they're farmed that way. So because they know that they need a lot of time to get to your plate, right? Here, vertical farms are embracing the farm to plate or farm to fork model, where you literally decrease the amount of time it takes from manufacturing process to go to the consumption process as clean as viable as possible. So those are some huge
they can
benefits.
stay on the plant to ripen rather than ripening on the port side or in the supermarket.
Exactly. And one more thing that they do here is the problem with GMO. Well, a lot of people say GMO is good because they cross genes of tomatoes with genes of rats, because rats are very resilient. And then you get a tomato that can be in a warehouse for like 6 months and nothing happens to it. But when you get it on your plate, it feels plastic. It doesn't have any taste and it feels empty. Like there's no nutrients in it. Here, what they're doing with vertical farming is basically because they don't need to leave it ripen in some storehouse. They really ripen it in the optimum environment. And what I mentioned before is they can manipulate light to increase flavor. For example, you can get something that's a lot more tasty than something that you would buy from a farm that's, like 10 days away, So we will probably, as a result of vertical farming, have tastier vegetables. And I think that because of this, we might see a huge boom in this like vegetable craze, where more people are like really loving them, because when you ask little kids, like, why don't you eat your vegetables? Like they don't like them because they don't taste good, because you give them candy and chocolate, and then they're like, their mouths are just like full of taste, and then they get spinach, and then they're like, what's this? Like, what's going on here? Where's the taste? Where's the flavor? So I'm sure that vertical farming will solve that as well.
A couple of things come to mind, not specifically relating to only vertical farming, but also applicable to cultured meat and basically any of these production processes that control the environment to this degree. And that is the human immune system. I'm just wondering about, like, I know you probably don't have an answer to this, but it's just a thought that occurs, that the human immune system is built by exercising itself on the contaminants that we run into in our daily lives. And we're already seeing a massive increase in the last couple of generations in stuff like allergies and just susceptibility to diseases, I suppose, that we may not have been susceptible to before. Now, running a race with that, of course, is medical technology. And so we're kind of combating it on the cure side, whereas our immune system is the prevention side. And if we are creating a kind of a clinical environment around the food that we produce, I do worry that we might be depriving our immune system of exercise.
Yes, that's a valid point. I also feel that by eating pizza and burgers that are not, like optimum for our nutrition, we are also depleting ourselves from valuable nutrients that are kind of keeping our immune system strong. If we get more healthy plants on our plates, we kind of might solve that solve that problem easier. Although plants might not be the only thing that we need to keep our immune system, like performing at a high rate. I think it's a balance of multiple things, not just nutrition. So it'll probably be exercise, healthy air, enough sunshine, decreased stress. What else did I find? Mental, emotional, social, and sexual connection with other people all make up huge factors that impact people on the whole spectrum. So the immune system is kind of like a feedback loop of if you're doing all of that kind of in balance. And as soon as one of those categories falls flat, usually your immune system says, oh, something is not wrong here. And then if you're exposed to a bacteria, you are more susceptible to some kind of disease kicking in, or infection, or whatever. Like guys, everyone who's listening, we're not medical, like we don't have doctorates in medical biology, but these are some of the things that I've read and that kind of seem obvious to me. Like if you don't keep balance in all of these things, probably something is going to go wrong somewhere, So the ideal would be to aim for the ideal. And by living this modern life, we have distanced ourselves from the ideal a lot, because, as you said, here in Ireland you have a lot of green. It's called the green country, the green Ireland, the Emerald Island.
40 shades of green.
Yeah, 40 shades of green and 50 shades of rain. And So basically, someone living
Although
in
it's
New York.
beautiful today, I will say.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone watching on the YouTube channel is probably like, "Where's the rain? Like, there's sunshine."
Yeah. Why does
um,
Brendan look like he's in a sunbed or something?
Brendan's in California,
Yeah.
30 degrees outside. Like,
I have to wear shades just to see the screen properly.
the truth is actually that we film on the only 5 days per year when there's sunshine in Ireland, just to have better lighting on the cameras. So,
Yeah.
but no,
We're just incredibly prescient. If there's anything that we've said that sounded relevant to recent news, it's just because we're really good at predicting what's going to happen. We recorded this 8 months ago.
exactly. So yeah, basically,
Which would have been winter. But anyway, sorry.
I have a sweater on.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically, for someone living in Hong Kong, they haven't seen, like, the Ring of Kerry for them would probably be so mind blowing that they would, be like, oh, this is, like Garden of Eden, because they're grown in asphalt, cement, and glass, which is basically how our society looks for most people, because the largest amount of the population that we have is in big cities. So we need solutions like this, where we're getting healthier food to at least address that thing, because you're eating 1, 2, 3, 5 times a day. So if you're putting bad food in yourself, then to the long term, it can have negative effects.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, not least because of the way the new connections that have been discovered between the brain and the gut. There's actually neurons, thinking cells in your stomach and in your digestive tract. That just kind of blows my mind. The idea of a gut feeling is utterly legitimized now by science.
It's real.
Yeah.
We had that conversation when we had that coffee, and I noticed, I added to that we also have a lot of neurons connected to the heart. And actually, in the last 2 weeks, I've stumbled on a fact about that as well. I've gone through a podcast that I've listened to beforehand. So there are more neurons connecting the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart, which means that you get a lot more information from your heart than your brain gives to your physical organs. Well, at least that organ. And it's also connected to the gut as well. So this gut feeling and this intuition thing that people say that it's,
I know it in my heart.
It's actually intuition that comes from your body, and your body can sense a lot of things that you wouldn't actually kind of think that it's possible. But I believe that it's real, and I believe that our mind has a really cool way of synthesizing a lot of information, and then the body interprets it, and then we're able to react to it accordingly.
Yeah, just makes me think of the science fiction concept of a brain in a jar, being kept alive and being able to speak and whatever. Might be a lot less comfortable and livable than they depict it as. I mean, not that it's depicted as particularly comfortable, but to be cut off from the neurons that have been doing that sort of intuitive and whatever they do. But that feedback that you get into your thought processes, that's an entirely hypothetical and ridiculous thought, but it's what popped up there.
I'm sure that we will see the first signs of that as soon as we hook up to Neuralink, and then this digital world is so cool, I don't need the physical body, and maybe then when we return from the digital world to the body, we'll feel a huge sense of the feeling that you haven't been home in a while. I think we'll get something like that, or maybe something that Douglas Adams describes in the book The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the first time you leave your galaxy, you will kind of look into the space towards where Earth is, because that's your home planet, and we maybe have this ingrained feeling that that's where we actually belong and where we come from, but we've never left the Earth for so long and so far that we don't know if we have that. But it's a really cool concept. So it'll be cool if we had something like that when entering with machines with our consciousness, that the consciousness knows that this is just a fake world, that we should kind of come back and be like, oh yeah, that's my body, now I'm here, now I'm quote unquote home.
It's a legitimate field of psychological study as well, because like people going to Mars, we've never gone so far from Earth that we couldn't look back and see, the blue and green and white disk of the world in the sky. But if that reduces to just a dot that could be potentially confused with other stars in the sky, that could, I personally, I don't buy it, but people say that that could have like a destabilizing effect on people's psyche.
Yeah,
I don't buy it. I think we'll be all right, but it's something that they consider.
I'm sure that from the astronauts that go, some of them will feel like huge homesickness,
Oh,
like
massively, yeah. But I don't think that's the same thing. Like, I think they're saying that people actually lose their minds because Earth is no longer visible to them as a touchstone. Certainly homesickness will exist.
Yeah. Maybe extreme homesickness that goes to depression and like, oh, what's the meaning of life, but I don't think it will drive them to, well, we don't know. Basically, we don't know.
Well, I'll find out when I get to Mars.
Yeah, we'll figure it out eventually. Yeah, so
I do think that like the picture of the future that we're painting here is, I don't know, I find it quite exciting. I think you were talking about, the holistic view of the body and the feedback loops and everything, from our psychological well-being and our sociability and all of that, and the lack of green spaces. And just getting fresh vegetables and good food is one element of that, but you also have to kind of see it. And vertical farming is sort of tucking that away. It's taking, now what it'll probably end up doing is freeing up an awful lot of green spaces to be natural, and to have, the reforestation of Ireland, for example. Ireland used to be carpeted by forest, and it has been largely cleared away. I'd say about 90% of the forests that used to cover this land were cut down in favor of farmland. And now you travel Ireland, and it is beautiful, and it is very, very scenic, but it is quite artificial at the same time, because you're seeing squares, a patchwork quilt of squares up the sides of mountains and so on. Maybe in 100 years' time, that all of that will be forest. And like, there was this phrase, and I'm sure a lot of people from urban environments will identify with this phrase, because adults, when I was growing up, would be going through an area, they'd always say, I remember when all of this was farmland. And that they'd be talking about an urbanized area with like buildings and stuff. Maybe in 100 years we'll be hiking through a forest, and the old person will say, I remember when all of this was farmland. And that'd be a great development. But
that would be a lot greener future, and I sincerely hope that happens. What I'm afraid that will happen is that people say, oh, now we don't have to keep cattle here, now we can make cities here, and just repeat the mistake that we did with like too urbanized areas. What I think we should dedicate one episode to is sustainable urban living, and all of these like futuristic design buildings that they're developing and creating through like a synthesis of using modern like sustainable materials like hemp, and architecture where the light is heating multiple rooms, not just one, and like multiple topics. But I feel that we have to work on our cities a lot.
Yeah, cities of the future is probably a good topic. But green spaces within those cities are going to be very important as well.
Yeah, definitely. Singapore supposedly has a lot of green spaces compared to how big the city is and the population. They have a lot of parks and a lot of like in-building parks, like a big massive building that dedicated just 2 floors or 3 floors, where people who are going through it can just go by and enjoy nature a little bit. Shopping malls with a lot of trees planted inside, and to me it actually looks a lot more beautiful than just like concrete and glass. So I'm definitely for the greener version.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna go list to finish this episode on the vertical farming and future of foods and the burgers and the meats that you discussed. I just want to add that some people are skeptical about vertical farming because it still does produce CO2. the initial cost is huge to build a warehouse like that. The amount of
That was actually
electricity.
something I was going to ask about, like the scalability of it. When you're talking about it being farm to fork and low travel distance between production and consumption, what would be the ideal size of the average vertical farm?
The number that I stumbled upon is from one company called Aerofarms. They said that they can place 700 acres of land into a large-sized warehouse. So think of a supermarket-sized warehouse that could supply for like 700 acres of land, which is incredible.
Yeah, 700-acre farm though is enormous, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm not a farmer, so I'm not sure what that would.
That's massive. That's massive. You can probably feed like half of the country, like with that. Well,
Yeah,
probably
so
not, but a city would be covered by one of them, definitely.
yeah, so
I know that
what you're probably looking at then is like a petrol station sized land area, that services like a quarter of a city.
I saw one guy that has his private vertical farm. His was let's say gas station sized, maybe a little bit higher. He says that he could feed 100 families with 5 meals per day of just like vegetables every week.
Wow. Okay.
So
5
one
meals
gas
a day.
station for 100 families. So if you get it to a warehouse size, you probably get close to like a considerable amount of the city, and so per city you will probably need like a handful of vertical farms, or maybe a dozen, or let's say 100 of them if you have a really large city.
And the carbon emissions that people are talking about there, is that all in electricity generation? Because that can be offset.
Yes, electricity, and I think the machinery there. Like I'm not sure, but that's one of the most resources that you find there about vertical farms are super positive, and the minority of them says that one research that was done has found that a vertical farm produces 0.15 to up to 4 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of lettuce farmed. So that sounds like a lot, but I don't see where it's coming from.
Indeed,
I'm not sure.
Because like a lot of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's been produced to kind of damage the image of electric cars has been around the charging infrastructure and how much CO2 the charging produces. But that's based on the assumption that we continue to use the energy sources that we're using now, which are CO2 producers. If you got your vertical farm and it's covering a huge area and you cover the roof in solar panels, you could probably be net negative on your energy.
Probably. I'm not sure how deep this study was, but I presume that to get a number that high, they probably calculated everything from building the building to producing the machinery, lights, pumps, and all of that, because that's probably from factories that are not very carbon efficient, and then but then again, if you look at it from the long term, let's say you set up one factory, one vertical farm like that, that's gonna become carbon negative in like 10 years, right? Because until then, the plants are absorbing carbon and producing oxygen as a result of it, of photosynthesis. So the more plants you can stack, the better. I imagine that at one point we'll probably start calculating how many vertical farms we need per high density city to resupply the city with air. And that probably people will start sucking in air from the cities that's filled with carbon dioxide and sending them through these massive vertical farms, so that the air gets cleaned and that the air gets put out is a lot fresher.
It's brilliant if that stacks up, if like the numbers pan out, which I suspect they probably could, given the right calibration. That's a great synergy of purpose, because you've got a facility that produces food, and now you're using that facility as like a carbon filter for the city.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
That would be amazing. I know there are plans in place of a lot of investors, like Silicon Valley startup founders, who literally want to send a lot of money towards vertical farming projects. And a lot of architects are interested in doing like, oh, you Brendan have a $10 billion company. We will design your new building and we will make it vertical farm friendly, so that not only that your employees have fresh food every day, but that also you have a lot more benefits, and you can sell the extra products from the amount of vegetables that you basically get. So I know that a lot of people are interested in this space, and there are a lot of startups based around it. So I'm just going to list a few companies here. I know that some of them are really big, some of them are already on the stock market available, so you can trade them, and some of them are just starting. So Agricool, that's a really cool name. Crop One, Bright Farm. Then we have Samabio, something like that. Planty is very well known in the US. Bovary is a huge company and one of the leaders. Yes. And
great name.
Aerofarms. So the last two are kind of the most well-known, Aerofarms and Bovary. And they have these huge installations with a lot of vertical farms, and they're producing
Bovary sounds like the name of a cultured meat company, though. Like, it's got bovine and ovary in there. It's a very meaty name.
My first association was that it comes from like a German name, because they have a lot of words that kind of sound like that. So yeah, but hey. Anyways, those are some of the companies that are the biggest in this space right now. Most people that do reports on this, when they look at the downside, is more towards all the food that we're wasting as a society, and that then you have the other side of the spectrum, that we still have people on this earth that don't have food at all, that are starving to death, and which is still like that's one of the mind-blowing things to me with this whole like 21st century. Like, you have people who are throwing away food, and then you have people who are not able to get any food for months, and then they have to figure out how to not starve with their whole families, and those numbers are not small. And most people say that we should tackle those problems to kind of get rid of like if we're farming.
It's all well and good saying that we should tackle those problems, but we need a way to do it. And to do anything on the large scale, I mean, it's almost a foregone conclusion at this point that we need at least some element of the profit motive to do it. So it's a tough one to solve.
Yeah. I feel that solo entrepreneurs who dedicate their lives to it kind of have the biggest impact. Just like, I don't know, people who go look for investments for a new company, people look for investments to, like charity comes to mind. I know there's a really cool company called Charity Water, and they raised a lot of money, and they're building wells in Africa and other places of the world as well, and they're doing amazing results. And he says that just by digging a well in like a small village, like the economical value of the village goes up drastically, because then they can clean their clothes, and then they don't have to waste money on bringing a doctor to the village. Then they can have cleaner food, and just everything in their life improves just for having cleaner water. And then he calculated like the price of digging a well. It's ridiculous, like people waste their money on such stupid things, and digging a well is like so much cheaper than, like, let's say buying a Lamborghini, and driving through Hollywood with that. So yeah, but hey, thank God there are people like that who think about how can I do this, to do that, to help people. And that's one of the reasons also that I started this podcast, because by spreading cool ideas like this, I think that we can make an impact. So we'll definitely have to address some of these topics again in the future, because just hearing them once won't be enough to change someone's mind. But we may plant a little seed that then grows.
Oh, see what you did there.
So yeah, that's kind of my ambition with this podcast, to kind of change the world, for a better place, and help people find the gold in life. I recently came upon a great quote from Tony Robbins. I actually heard it years ago, but I've forgotten about it, and then I heard it again now. He says that success is a science because you can calculate it, figure out the steps, replicate what a company did, follow someone's career path, and basically emulate the same things to get the same results. But fulfillment is an art form because it'll be different for each person, and you have to figure it out for yourself, and you have to find it on your own. So that's why the Uncle Gold podcast brings so many varied topics to kind of help people find their, like passion and everything that they're looking for in life. And that's kind of where I would end it here. Brendan, do you have any finishing thoughts for this episode?
Well, it kind of, I suppose, appropriately enough, the discussion grew out of the seed that we planted. The topics that we wanted to cover grew into a more general view of the future, and it's the risk of repeating myself. I think we have a possibility to make the future a very bright place, and the concept of having plentiful food that's clean, healthy, it doesn't hurt the environment, at least to the extent that we hurt it now to produce our food. It doesn't hurt animals, and contributes to an environment, like a local environment in which our societies can live, which is bright and fresh and cheerful. I think it's a very positive thing. And let's get another one of those Beyond Meat burgers as well. And
Definitely.
Find out some other fake meat that's good. And yeah, I look forward to the day that we can have a vertically farmed salad with our cultured meat burger. Yeah, definitely.
Brendan, give us a prediction. When will we have a lab-grown burger and a vertically farmed salad on our plate?
I don't think it's very far away. I think vertically farmed salad is probably like 2 or 3 years away.
If not sooner.
I'd say that's I'd say that's like an average, a median point for how far away it is. Lab-grown burger, 5 to 7 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, if not sooner as well.
Yeah.
Like the novelty burgers will probably start to turn up in a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And the point at which it sort of supplants the traditional farming of meat.
Surplants?
That's maybe 10 or 15 years, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least begins to take a significant portion of that market.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. We'll keep our eyes open. Definitely try and
taste buds salivated.
And we'll keep you guys informed. Thank you so much for listening and being here with me and Brendan. Me and Brendan actually decided to make this a regular thing, like once a month, do an episode about technology and cool topics that are kind of useful to humanity. So definitely stay tuned if you like our discussions. We appreciate if you leave us a comment on what's something new that you discovered that you haven't heard before, or what are some of the topics that you would like us to discuss in the next episode. We already have a few ideas there that we're gonna do. There's definitely a big list, because each time we start talking, we're like, oh, we can do this and we can do and we can do that. So we have a lot of fun doing this. Thank you for all the podcast listeners on the podcast sites. Thank you for all the people who are watching it on the YouTube channel and subscribing. Definitely check out the Uncle Gold podcast clips channel.
Giving us a thumbs up and hitting that bell and all of the YouTube things.
Yeah, and you know what? Share it with someone who might like this kind of topics. I'm sure that you have some friends who are very interested in healthy food and where this whole thing is going. So make sure to send them this video so they know that this is that the future is not grim, that it's bright and
exactly. And you can bet that they have some issue to take with some detail that we've got wrong, because we're new to this. We're learning all about this as we go. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Please leave a comment if we're wrong about something.
I'm sure people will. Yeah, and Brendan, thank you again for taking the time. Thank you for being such a great co-host, for providing all the information and your thoughts on everything that we discussed today.
Well, thanks very much for having me along again, Borna, and for calling me a co-host. That was nice.
Yeah. I feel that through our last 2 episodes, we've kind of grown into it, and the more I've been thinking about it, the more it makes sense to me, because ever since we met, we had a lot of fun talking with each other, and then with this whole podcasting, since it started, I had a lot of fun, and why not continue with that on a regular basis? Also, our last video is performing really, really well. Guys, if you haven't watched it, you definitely have to watch the video. We'll leave the links right here at the end of this episode. So thank you again for watching and listening. Thank you, Brendan, and we'll see you in the next episode. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Uncle Gold.
The what?
I almost said gaming channel.
All
right. We'll restart that.
Welcome back to the Uncle Gold Eating Channel.
The Uncle Gold Podcast.